The morning Sarah woke up with that strange blue stain on her thigh, I thought she'd spilled something in her sleep. Maybe knocked over a pen or some craft paint from her art supplies. It looked almost metallic under the bathroom light, like liquid copper mixed with sapphire. She scrubbed at it for 20 minutes, but it wouldn't come off. "It's probably just a bruise," she said, pulling down her pajama pants. "You know how I bruise easy." But we both knew bruises don't glow faintly in the dark, and they definitely don't pulse with their own rhythm. The next morning, there were 2 more spots, one on her ankle, another behind her knee. Same electric blue color, same soft luminescence. Sarah made a doctor's appointment, but Dr. Martinez just shrugged and ordered some blood work. Said he'd never seen anything like it, but people get weird skin conditions all the time. That night, I pretended to sleep while watching her. Around 3 in the morning, she got up and walked to the window. Not walked exactly, more like glided, her feet barely touching the hardwood floor. She stood there for an hour, perfectly still, staring out at our backyard. I wanted to call out to her, but something held me back. The way she stood felt wrong, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. When she finally came back to bed, I noticed the blue marks had spread up her leg, forming what looked like a map of veins under her skin. The blood work came back normal. Perfect, actually. Dr. Martinez said her iron levels were better than most athletes, her white cell count ideal. He recommended a dermatologist, but the earliest appointment was 3 weeks out. Meanwhile, the marks kept spreading. By the end of the first week, they covered both legs entirely. Sarah started wearing long pants everywhere, even in the July heat. She said the marks didn't hurt, didn't itch, didn't feel like anything at all. But I caught her staring at them sometimes, tracing the patterns with her finger like she was reading something written in a language only she understood. The sleepwalking got worse. Every night around the same time, she'd get up and go to different windows throughout the house. Kitchen, living room, my office upstairs, always standing perfectly still, always staring outside. I followed her once, tried to see what she was looking at, but there was nothing there. Just our quiet suburban street, empty driveways, porch lights casting yellow circles on the sidewalk. When I asked her about it in the morning, she had no memory of getting up at all. The blue started appearing on her arms during the second week, thin lines at first like someone had drawn on her with a glowing marker, then thicker patches that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. She stopped going to work, called in sick with a mysterious rash. Her boss was understanding at first, but I could hear the concern in her voice during their phone calls. Sarah spent most of her days sitting by the living room window now, even when she was awake. She'd make coffee in the morning, then settle into the armchair that faced our front yard and just watch. When I asked what she was looking for, she'd smile this distant smile and say she wasn't looking for anything. She was waiting. Waiting for what? I'm not sure yet, but I'll know when it comes. The marks reached her neck on day 12, delicate spirals that climbed from her collarbone to just below her jawline, pulsing with that same ethereal light. She looked beautiful in a terrifying way, like some kind of bioluminescent sea creature that had learned to walk on land. I tried to take pictures to show the doctor, but the blue never appeared in photos. The camera just showed her normal skin, unmarked and pale. Even when I could clearly see the glowing patterns with my own eyes, the lens saw nothing unusual. That's when I knew we weren't dealing with any kind of medical condition. I called my brother Mike, who'd always been interested in strange phenomena. He'd tell stories at family gatherings about weird things he'd witnessed during his years as a paramedic. People who'd survived things that should have killed them, unexplained injuries that healed overnight, patients who claimed to see things that weren't there. "Have you ever seen anything like blue glowing marks on someone's skin?" I asked him during a late-night phone call. There was a long pause. "Where did you see that?" "On Sarah. They're spreading, and she's been acting strange, sleepwalking, staring out windows, barely eating." Mike was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally he spoke, his voice careful and measured. "I saw something similar once. About 15 years ago. Woman came into the ER with marks like you're describing. Said they'd been appearing for weeks." "What happened to her?" "That's the thing. She discharged herself against medical advice the next morning. Never saw her again. But I talked to her husband a few months later at a grocery store. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. Said she disappeared one night, just vanished from their bedroom while he was sleeping." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Disappeared how? No signs of forced entry. No indication she'd packed anything or planned to leave. She was just gone. Police investigated, but they never found any trace of her. After we hung up, I sat in the dark kitchen, watching Sarah through the doorway as she stood motionless at the living room window. The blue patterns across her skin pulsed gently, casting shifting shadows on the walls around her. Sarah stopped eating on day 15. Not dramatically. She'd sit at the dinner table with me, move food around on her plate, take tiny bites that she'd hold in her mouth for minutes before swallowing. She was losing weight rapidly, her face becoming gaunt, her eyes taking on a hollow quality that made me think of empty wells. But the blue marks were brighter than ever, now covering most of her visible skin in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, like the designs were crawling across her body, rearranging themselves into new configurations. She talked less now, and when she did speak, her voice had a distant quality, like she was talking to me from the bottom of a deep cave. She'd mention things that hadn't happened yet, conversations we'd never had, places we'd never been. When I pointed this out, she'd look confused for a moment, then smile that same empty smile. "Time feels different now," she said one evening as we sat in the living room. "I can see forward and backward at the same time. It's like being in a river where the water flows both ways." I begged her to see another doctor, to go to the hospital, to let me call someone for help, but she refused, saying there was nothing wrong with her. She was just changing, she said, becoming something better. The nights were the worst part. Her sleepwalking had evolved into something more complex. Instead of just standing at windows, she'd move through the house in specific patterns, walking from room to room in sequences that seemed almost ritualistic. Kitchen to living room to my office to our bedroom, then back to the kitchen, over and over for hours. I timed her routes and realized she was tracing the same path through the house that the blue marks traced across her skin. The pattern on her body was a map of her nightly journeys, and both were growing more complex as the days passed. On day 18, I woke up to find her standing over our bed, staring down at me with eyes that reflected light like an animal's. The blue marks covered her face now, delicate traceries that made her look like she was wearing a mask made of starlight. She didn't move when I sat up, didn't blink, didn't seem to breathe. "Sarah," I whispered. She tilted her head slightly, like she was trying to remember who that name belonged to. Then she turned and glided out of the room, her feet making no sound on the floor. I followed her downstairs and found her standing in the middle of our backyard, perfectly naked. her entire body glowing with that ethereal blue light. The marks weren't just on her skin anymore. They seemed to float slightly above it, like a second skin made of pure energy. She was beautiful and terrible, inhuman and perfect. I wanted to go to her, to touch her, to ask her what was happening. But something deep in my brain, some primitive survival instinct, kept me frozen at the kitchen window. That's when I saw them. They emerged from the tree line at the back of our property, moving with the same gliding motion Sarah had developed. At first, I thought they were people, tall, thin shapes walking upright. But as they got closer, I could see they weren't quite human. Their limbs were too long, their joints bent at impossible angles, their heads elongated and smooth. And they all glowed with the same blue light. Sarah turned toward them as they approached, and I could see her face in profile. She was smiling, but not with her mouth. The blue marks across her features were shifting, rearranging themselves into expressions I couldn't understand. She looked happy in a way that had nothing to do with human emotion. The beings surrounded her, and for a moment, they all stood perfectly still, like they were communicating in some silent language. Then together, they began to move in complex patterns around our yard, weaving between the trees, tracing shapes in the grass that seemed to pulse with their own light. I watched for hours, unable to move, unable to look away. It was like watching a dance performed by creatures from a dream, beautiful and hypnotic and utterly wrong. Sarah moved with them as if she'd been practicing these steps her entire life, her transformed body flowing through the choreography with impossible grace. As dawn approached, the beings began to fade, becoming translucent, then disappearing entirely. Sarah stood alone in our backyard for a few more minutes, then turned and walked back toward the house. I scrambled back to bed, pretending to be asleep when she slipped in beside me. Her skin was ice cold and she smelled like ozone and copper pennies. The next day I called Mike again, desperate for answers. I described what I'd seen, expecting him to tell me I was losing my mind. Instead, there was another long silence. "The woman I told you about," he said finally. Her husband mentioned something similar. Said he saw her in their backyard the night she disappeared, surrounded by things that looked like people but weren't quite right. What did the police say when he told them? They didn't believe him. Figured grief was making him imagine things, but I always wondered. Mike's voice trailed off. Wondered what? I kept an eye on missing person reports after that. Over the years, I've seen maybe a dozen cases that followed the same pattern. Someone develops strange markings, starts acting differently, then vanishes without a trace. Always the same description from family members. Talk of glowing beings, strange dances, people who stopped being quite human. I felt like I was drowning. So what do I do? How do I stop this? I don't think you can, Mike said quietly. From what I've observed, once the process starts, it runs its course. The question is whether you're strong enough to let her go when the time comes. I tried everything I could think of. I begged Sarah to leave town with me, to see a specialist, to at least acknowledge that something was wrong. But she seemed barely aware of my presence now, spending her days motionless by the window and her nights dancing with creatures that shouldn't exist. The blue light was so bright now that I had to close my eyes when I looked directly at her. She moved through the house like a ghost, her feet never quite touching the ground, her body casting no shadow even in direct sunlight. When I tried to touch her, my hand passed through her arm like she was made of mist. On the 20th night, I called Mike one last time. "It's happening tonight," I said. I can feel it in the air. Something's building, something final. Are you going to try to stop her? I don't know how. I don't even know if she's still Sarah anymore, or if whatever she's becoming just wears her face. Mike was quiet for a moment. Maybe that's not the right question. Maybe you should ask yourself if the person she's becoming is happier than the person she was. That night, Sarah didn't come to bed at all. I found her in the backyard again, but this time she wasn't alone. There were dozens of them now, the blue beings, arranged in concentric circles around our property. Sarah stood in the center, her arms raised toward the sky, her entire body blazing with that otherworldly light. The air hummed with energy, and I could feel something building, like the moment before lightning strikes. The beings began to move faster, their dance becoming more frantic, more urgent. Sarah spun in the center of it all, her transformation finally complete. She was no longer human. Her body had elongated, her limbs stretched and refined, her head smooth and featureless, except for the intricate patterns of light that covered every inch of her skin. She was beautiful in the way that deep space is beautiful, vast and alien, and completely beyond human understanding. The humming grew louder, and suddenly the air above our backyard began to shimmer. A doorway was opening, or maybe a window into somewhere else entirely. Through it, I could see a landscape of impossible geometry, buildings that grew like trees, cities that floated in air the color of twilight. The beings began to rise, their feet leaving the ground, their bodies becoming more translucent with each passing second. Sarah rose with them, her face turned toward that alien sky, her expression one of pure joy. I ran outside then, screaming her name, begging her to stay, to remember who she used to be. But she looked down at me with eyes that held no recognition, no memory of the life we'd shared. I was just another part of the world she was leaving behind. One by one, they passed through the shimmering doorway until only Sarah remained. She hovered there for a moment, looking back at our house, at the life she'd inhabited for 28 years. Then she smiled, not with the blue light, but with her actual face, and for just a second I saw the woman I'd married. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice carried on a wind that smelled like rain and starlight. "But this is what I'm supposed to be." Then she was gone, and the doorway closed, and I was alone in my backyard at 3 a.m, staring up at stars that suddenly seemed much too far away. The police found no evidence of foul play. Sarah's disappearance was classified as a missing person case, though they clearly suspected I'd done something to her. Her car was still in the driveway, her purse on the kitchen counter, her phone charging by the bed. People don't just vanish into thin air, they said. But I knew she hadn't vanished. She'd transformed into something else entirely and left for a place where physics worked differently, where beings of light danced between dimensions and called to others of their kind. I moved out of the house a month later. Couldn't stand being in those rooms where she'd waited and changed, and finally transcended everything that made her human. The new owners seem happy enough, though I notice they keep their curtains drawn at night. Mike and I still talk sometimes. He tells me about new cases he's seen, people with strange markings who disappear in the night. It's happening more often now, he says, like whatever's taking them is getting bolder, choosing more candidates. Sometimes I wonder if it's starting again with someone else, if there's another spouse somewhere, watching their partner develop strange blue marks, and wondering if they're losing their mind. I think about reaching out, about warning them, but what would I say? that beings from another dimension are recruiting humans for purposes beyond our comprehension. That love isn't enough to keep someone anchored to this reality when something bigger calls to them. I keep Sarah's photo on my nightstand, the last one I took before the marks appeared. She looked so normal in it, so completely human, smiling at something I said while we were having lunch at that little cafe downtown. Sometimes I stare at it and try to convince myself that everything else was just a breakdown, a psychotic episode brought on by stress. But then I remember the way she looked when she was dancing with them, the pure joy on her face as she prepared to leave everything behind. She wasn't taken or kidnapped or transformed against her will. She was chosen, and when the time came, she chose them back. I still love her. That's the hardest part to accept. Even knowing what she became, even understanding that she's so far beyond human now that I might as well be mourning someone who died. I still love the woman who used to make coffee in the morning and fall asleep with her head on my shoulder. But late at night, when I'm lying in my new apartment, listening to the city sounds outside my window, I sometimes catch myself hoping I'll wake up with blue marks on my skin, hoping that maybe I was chosen too, and just haven't realized it yet. Because the alternative, living the rest of my life knowing that the most important person in my world found something so much better than what we had together, is almost too much to bear. I check my skin every morning now, looking for any sign of blue light, any hint that I might be starting my own transformation. So far, nothing. Just ordinary human skin, ordinary human life, ordinary human loneliness. But I keep checking, just in case. Because sometimes when the nights are very quiet and the stars seem closer than they should, I think I can hear her calling to me from somewhere far away, telling me that there's a place where love isn't bounded by flesh and time, where beings of light dance eternal patterns across infinite skies. Maybe someday I'll be ready to answer. Maybe someday I'll grow brave enough to let go of everything I think I know about what it means to be human and discover what it might mean to be something more. Until then, I wait and watch and remember the woman who taught me that transformation is possible, even if it means leaving everything familiar behind. The blue marks haven't appeared on my skin yet, but I'm not giving up hope.